Well, it's late spring here now in England, and I'm going to go away from Lincolnshire for this bit of filming, down to Wiltshire again, where I was born. I was born at RAF Rawton, which is near to Swindon, which makes me a moonraker. Coming up to 64 now, and I'm going to take you back in time. We're going to have a look at late spring down there, take a look at the beautiful bluebell wood and some of the countryside, and remember some of the past filming I've done discusses and shows some of the medieval works down there, the neolithic things like Stonehenge and the long barrows and the tombs there, the mounds and so on. Let's take a look at those as well. We're going to take a look at one of the long barrows and actually go inside it. We'll look at the surrounding countryside and the beautiful rape, but mainly this time the spring flowers. So the bluebells in several woodlands, Westwood and so on around Marlborough, and we'll also go into Bowood House and the beautiful rhododendron gardens there. So a film in two parts. We'll start off with the countryside, some of the medieval areas, and then we'll work our way into some of the bluebell woods. And I'm going to tell you a bit of a ghost story as well, because I have two ghost stories from that era. I would have been about 18, 19 then, about 45 years ago now. As a student, I was coming up from London and visiting my parents who lived there near Pewsey. And I have two true ghost stories that I'd like you to hear and tell you about. One of them I might have to explain in a bit more detail later, but the shorter one was a rather beautiful experience that happened in a woodland late one night as I came back on my little old scooter. I was a mod then, I guess, and I stopped overnight on my way back from the visit I was making. Moonlit night in a beautiful area looking out over the Pewsey Vale, so right over this vast vista. At the top in all these medieval areas was this ancient woodland, and I sensed a presence there. I'm a naturalist, as you know, a fisherman, and I have a lot of interest in birds and wildlife and animals, in nature and flowers, and in entomology and lepidoptery and so on. But because of this I've become quite aware and sensitive to things around me, and I can sense, obviously as many of you can, if somebody doesn't like you or somebody, a presence is there, as much as you can usually sense if somebody likes you. And in woodland I often know where things are even before I see them, just by sensing. This was a case many years ago when I was younger, about 14, and one night I sensed something above my head when I was asleep in bed. I sensed something above my head when I was lying in bed, turned the light on, and above my head about 3 foot was a massive spider on the wall. I can't have seen it, I can't have known, but this sort of sixth sense that we have is what I'm talking about. And I think, as I was told later by a member of the Spiritualist Church, we see these things only when we're meant to see them, to help us believe or be aware. And I've only seen these two things in my life, these two events, both in that area, that I was really aware of. So we'll discuss those stories later as well. And in between, on this trip, the main reason I was going down was to see my sister and also to see my eldest daughter, Julia, and her new son. And he went out in these woodlands, and he had thoroughly enjoyed himself seeing these beautiful flowers and pottering about. He's just beginning to walk, he's just toddling now. So it was lovely to see them both again and be a granddad again. So if you'd like to share this event with me, here we go. Let's go down to Wiltshire and we'll look at these gorgeous bits of countryside and these beautiful flowers, especially through the bluebell woods and especially into the rhododendron gardens of Bowood House, which I'd thoroughly recommend this time of year. There's no experience I think as good as that in the whole of the British Isles. They have one of the best gardens of rhododendrons there are. Here we are in Wiltshire. Many years ago, when I was only 10 years old, now I'm 64, I used to come down here with a bicycle, a little shrimp net, and we would try and catch bullheads and sticklebacks in this little stream. A long time ago now. Just a little journey down memory lane.
That's incredibly tame, isn't it, Sarah? No, I'm not getting off Are you ready? Huh?
Yeah? It's good.
Not sure how, tell me, don't know many guards for you, Alex.
Oh yeah, St George.
Open fight.
Knackered.
Yeah.
Well, here I am again in Wiltshire. Let me tell you a few little stories about this area again and follow on from a film when I came down from the baptism. A few interesting stories about ghosts in the past here. I used to be quite sensitive to such spiritual things, and you might think it a bit weird, but these stories are true, and I verified them by writing them down at the time, so I was quite awake. Anyway, I will explain. The story starts as I travel back late one night from Marlborough, up that steep hill, across the downs, and then down to the Vale of Pewsey. But before I dropped down, I decided to call to a beautiful place looking over the Vale of Pewsey, right up on top of the hill. Little lights down below, the trains going by, a moonlit night, calm, warm, still in the summer, very atmospheric, the perfume of honeysuckle hanging in the air. As we've already seen, this whole area is steeped in history, from Stone Age to Neolithic to Iron Age, right through to medieval times. This hill here had a fort upon its top, but the event actually starts in the car park behind me. I'd just parked up my scooter and took my helmet off, was enjoying the balmy quality of the air and the views, when I sensed a presence. I sensed something else, or somebody else was there. It felt feminine. Looking through that view there, I felt something guiding me, pulling me in the moonlight, just as it is here, through that gap there. It wanted me to go towards that gap. So, following my intuition, I thought, why not? I did. I followed this presence, couldn't see anything, through the trees, and then got lost on the path, stopped, felt for the presence again, and the presence led me on to another path. Then I was lost again, blocked by trees, and it led me on again through this woodland to another path. And so this went on about 5 or 6 times. Each time I couldn't find the path, I stopped, felt the present sense, and it led me on to find the new path again. I would have a job to find that path even in daylight, let alone at night as it was then. Eventually I came to the edge of the wood and a huge ploughed field. It wanted me to continue across the field. It was leading me, guiding me. It felt very lonely, definitely feminine. It seemed to want me. Anyway, I wasn't prepared to go across a ploughed field at that time of night towards those lights, wherever this thing had come from, or wherever it was. But I felt very sorry for it, and I wished it to move on in life, as I feel spirits do. Hopefully my empathy worked, as I've returned since many times and never felt this presence further. My main story was set in my parents' old house near to Pewsey in Wiltshire, near a little village called Wilcott, which isn't all that far from this place, Stonehenge. It involves not only myself, but my mother and my sister as well. At the time she was about 10 years old. We're talking 45 years ago now. In my youth, I was about 18 years old. The area itself is steeped in history, with many of these Neolithic monuments and mounds and hills, and only just up the road, King Alfred's Court was marked by 3 trees. At the time I was an art student in London and had just come home for a winter break. My mother had already spoken to me about some strange happenings in the house and how she felt a strange presence, a spiritual presence. She was very Christian and actually wanted to speak to this being, this feeling, and help it move on. She used a palm cross in doing so. As my father was in the RAF, he was away a lot, so I felt this very strong of her to be on her own and deal with this situation. Of course, none of this story was mentioned to my younger sister, and it was only later that she actually came up with her own story that linked with this. The house had been built for and tended, and the gardens designed by a local gardener. We were told that nobody had died in the house, but it later turned out that in fact the old gardener had died there. The house itself was nothing special. The garden was rather sweet. This part of the ground floor was designed in an L shape. There was a corner bedroom, then a little central lounge, and then another corner bedroom. As you see here, the front left of the house was my sister's bedroom, then was the central lounge in the middle of the house there, and on the far right corner was my bedroom where this event occurred. I remember the time as being 10:30 because I actually got up and made a note and logged the time from the clock in my bedroom at the end of the event. The house was renamed Burrish, as the old name for Burwash in Sussex where my family came from. It's strange that the words used by my mother to describe some of these happenings and feelings remained the same as my sister's later on. The feeling of something between her shoulder blades, the room going cold, something apparently looking at her, standing behind her, watching over. So let me describe now the situation that happened that night, in this very corner bedroom that you see here. At that time of year, we had the central heating on, and there were 2 central heating panels in that bedroom, underneath both of the windows, so normally the room was very warm, very dry and very cosy. This was also echoed by the fact the room was quite a small one. On the far left at the bottom you see a door. Each of the top and right sides of it were windows, and underneath those windows radiators with nice heavy curtains that night were closed, so it was nice and cosy. Centre left you'll note the bed here, and also note the bedside table with a lamp, and that the lamp was not working, because later that night I was to reach out for it to switch it on and realise that it did not. The only other form of lighting was the main light, of which the switch was just by the door, which is bottom left you'll note. To get to that, I had to get out and past this ghost that actually appeared. There's no way I was going to do that. I remember waking up and thinking that the central heating must have broken down, because the room was extremely cold, clammy, and almost damp like a cellar. I'd been awake for several minutes, so I'd had time to become accustomed to the dark. My eyes hadn't changed, it was dark in that room. I sat up and considered getting out of bed and seeing what had happened to the heating, reached out for the lamp beside me and realised it wasn't working. I became aware of a presence at the bottom of the bed. Something or somebody was there. As I stared down into the darkness, all the darkness in the room gradually went into one form. It was as if you had poured ink into a jar of water and it spread out, but in this case instead of spreading outwards, the darkness came inwards and the room became semi-dark or twilight, and this form with slightly soft edges appeared at the foot of my bed, about 6 foot tall, almost tombstone, a body with a hood or just a body and head form, a bit like a monk in his robe and hood. Of course it was very unpleasant, the feeling was malevolent, and I wasn't a very happy bunny at all. In fact I was damn scared. Very smoothly and without any swaying or other movement than just sliding towards me, it moved from the bottom of the bed up the right hand side of the bed towards me, towering over me. By this time I was sitting bolt upright, staring straight at it, or up at it. As one hears about somebody ending their life, my life went before me, and of course I wondered if it was the end of mine, it had come to get me, or just what this thing was. Possibly there is something in these old Dracula stories, where they say you hold the cross up and will the beast back. Because the mood for me then suddenly changed. Although I was extremely scared, of course I was, I also became very annoyed and angry. I'd realised in those few seconds, minutes, that I hadn't done enough in life. I wanted to do a lot more. I was there to do a lot more and give in life, and I certainly hadn't done enough to be taken away from it, and this thing was invading my privacy. So I decided to fight back in my own way, and I actually remember stammering out, "Piss off," but it wasn't just that, I went piss off, and I do remember even feeling amused about that at the moment, amongst all of this confusion and fear. But this is not a Casper the Ghost story, or made up from fiction I've seen earlier. This actually happened. And the ghost didn't just go away then, as one would expect. It stayed there towering above me for what seemed like minutes, but in fact for just a couple of seconds possibly. Then it seemed to slide back down to the end of the bed, back to the original position, and not reaching that spot, the darkness went back into the room. The form of the ghost just spread out, and the room immediately became warm. I sensed it had gone. Almost immediately I climbed out of bed, went across to the main light by the door, switched it on, checked the time, got some paper and pencil, wrote it all down to make sure it wasn't just a dream. The room was warm, the central heating was perfect, the radiators were boiling, the curtains were closed, and there didn't seem to be any scientific or logical reason for any of this at all. Now, with the aid of simple graphics, let me show you how it appeared to me that night. I checked, using my hands, for any cool areas in the room. My hands are probably the most sensitive parts of me because of my artwork. And I could actually feel a remaining column of cool air moving gently across towards the edge of the corner of that room, the far top right corner of the plan. But that could easily be explained as my imagination. Now that the room was warm and the feeling had gone, and the feeling of malevolence had gone, it was a normal cosy bedroom, I went back to bed, having made my notes, and didn't wake up till the morning again. I did explain this to my mother the next morning. We had a chat about it. Of course my father was away at the time still. We didn't say anything to my sister, of course. Later on, the events were to go a little bit further though, because my sister also did mention that she had woken up one morning in the bedroom that was further on from this lounge, so it was my room, then the lounge, then her room, and as she woke up there was an old man's face leering, not pleasantly, not smiling, but leering over her, and as she opened her eyes and woke up fully, the face disappeared. But this was said to us many years later. Before she told us this, she had said to my mother that she didn't like walking in the corridor along to her bedroom that ran along all three of these rooms, because she had the feeling that the corridor went cold, clammy, damp, that something was following her, that something was looking between her shoulder blades. 4 or 5 years later, I was with a friend at a spiritualist church, and afterwards we met a couple of its members, who suddenly turned round to me and said, "Oh, you had a happening once, didn't you, in a house? And it was the owner of the house who had died there, who resented you all being there, and you'd done something in the garden to annoy him. Did you use a gun or something to shoot some birds?" Now nobody could have known that I had an air gun at that time, and had been potting off a few sparrows, but it was a warning that he wanted you all out. Anyway, later on those rooms were revamped, knocked into an L-shaped lounge, and the remaining bedroom that my sister was in still remains, but there were no more feelings or sightings as far as we knew. But as a final observation, they did say that we only see these things as we're meant to see them, to convince us, to help us to understand that they do exist.